Once upon a time, in a kingdom surrounded by rolling meadows, silver rivers, and whispering forests, there lived a girl named Cinderella. Long ago, before sadness came into her life, Cinderella lived happily with her loving parents. Her mother had been gentle and wise, teaching her that kindness was stronger than cruelty. But when her mother passed away, her father, wishing to give his daughter companionship, remarried a woman with 2 daughters of her own. At first, Cinderella hoped for friendship and a new family, but her stepmother's heart was cold, and her stepsisters were vain and unkind. They looked at Cinderella's sweetness with envy, and over time, they made her their servant. She rose at dawn to light the fires in the fireplaces, swept the floors until they gleamed, and washed endless piles of clothes until her hands grew rough. Yet, even in hardship, Cinderella did not grow bitter. She whispered to the little mice in the pantry, fed the sparrows at her window, and sang lullabies as she worked. Her heart remained gentle, like her mother's. One bright spring morning, a messenger arrived in the village, riding a horse draped in velvet. He carried a scroll sealed with the royal crest. With a voice that echoed across the square, he announced, "By order of His Majesty, the King, and Her Majesty, the Queen, there shall be a grand ball at the palace tomorrow night. Every maiden in the kingdom is invited. The prince himself shall choose a bride." The village burst with excitement. Tailors stitched gowns, cobblers polished shoes, and girls dreamed of dancing in the glittering palace. At Cinderella's house, her stepsisters nearly fainted from delight. "I must wear silk," cried the elder, "and I shall need the finest jewels." The younger declared. Cinderella, her heart fluttering, whispered, "May I go as well?" Her stepmother turned sharply, narrowing her eyes. "You," she said, "in soot-stained clothes. The prince would laugh. Stay home where you belong." Cinderella bowed her head, hiding her tears. Still, she helped her sisters prepare, curling their hair, fastening ribbons, and even mending their hems. She whispered to herself, "Be kind, even when others are not." The following evening, the grand carriage rattled away, carrying her stepmother and stepsisters to the ball. Cinderella stood alone at the gate, watching the wheels vanish into the dusk. The house grew quiet, the air heavy with silence. She sat by the hearth, her hands folded in her lap, and let the tears she had held back all day finally fall. "If only I could go," she whispered to her mouse friends, "just for one night. To see the palace, to hear the music." Suddenly, a warm glow filled the kitchen. Cinderella looked up, startled, and there stood a woman dressed in silver and starlight. Her eyes sparkled with kindness, and in her hand she held a wand that shimmered like the moon. "Do not cry, my child," said the woman gently. "I am your fairy godmother. You have been brave and you have been kind, and for that you deserve a little magic." The fairy godmother stepped into the garden and tapped her wand upon a pumpkin. It swelled, glowed, and transformed into a carriage with lanterns glowing like fireflies. 6 mice scurried forward and, with a wave, became elegant white horses. A plump rat turned into a dignified coachman, and 4 lizards became footmen in fine livery. Finally, with a swirl of her wand, she touched Cinderella's ragged dress. It shimmered and lengthened, threads of silver and blue weaving themselves into a gown that glittered like the night sky. Around her neck lay a delicate ribbon, and upon her feet appeared glass slippers, clear as crystal and light as air. Cinderella gasped, "Oh, fairy godmother, it's more beautiful than I ever dreamed." But the fairy godmother raised her finger. "Remember, my dear, when the clock strikes midnight, the spell shall break. You must be home by then." "I promise," Cinderella said, her heart pounding with joy. The palace shone like a jewel under the stars. its towers glowing with lanterns. Music drifted through the air, and the courtyard was filled with carriages. When Cinderella's carriage rolled up, heads turned, she stepped out, her gown sparkling in the torchlight. The guests whispered in awe, wondering who this radiant young lady could be. Even her stepsisters, though they did not recognize her, stared in envy. Inside the grand hall, the prince stood at the foot of the staircase. His eyes, weary from greeting so many strangers, suddenly lit up. He stepped forward and bowed. "Would you honor me with a dance?" he asked softly. Cinderella curtsied, her cheeks warm, and together they glided across the marble floor. The orchestra swelled, the chandeliers glistened, and the crowd parted to watch. They spoke quietly as they danced. "I feel I have known you forever," the prince murmured. "And yet," Cinderella replied with a smile, "we have only just met." They wandered into the palace gardens, where fountains sparkled under the moon. They spoke of their dreams, of kindness and courage, and of finding someone who truly understood them. For the first time, Cinderella felt she was seen for who she truly was, not a servant, not a girl in rags, but herself. The night slipped by like a dream. Suddenly, the great clock began to strike. Dong, dong, dong. Cinderella gasped. "Oh, no, it's midnight." She turned and ran, her gown shimmering as she fled through the palace. "Wait!" cried the prince, chasing after her. Down the staircase she flew, and as she hurried, one of her glass slippers slipped from her foot and clattered on the steps. She dared not stop. She reached the carriage, and in a flash, the spell unraveled. Her gown turned back to rags, the horses into mice, and the carriage back into a pumpkin. Breathless, Cinderella hurried home in the shadows, clutching the one glass slipper she had kept. The prince was determined. Holding the slipper, he declared, "I will marry the lady whose foot fits this shoe." From one house to another, his men traveled, but the slipper was always too small or too large. At last, they came to Cinderella's home. The elder stepsister tried to force her foot inside. "It fits," she cried, though her toes bulged. The younger pushed and shoved. "It fits me better," but the slipper would not yield. "May I try?" came a soft voice. Cinderella stepped forward, her eyes shy but hopeful. Her stepmother scoffed. "She's nothing but a servant." But the prince nodded. "Let her try." Cinderella slipped her foot into the glass slipper, and it fit as though it had been made for her. Then, from her pocket, she drew forth the matching slipper she had kept hidden. The prince's face lit with joy. "It is you," he whispered. "The one I danced with, the one I cannot forget." Soon after, Cinderella was married to the prince in a celebration that filled the kingdom with laughter and song. The villagers cheered, for everyone admired her gentle spirit. Though she was now a princess, Cinderella remained humble. She forgave her stepmother and stepsisters, offering them a chance to change their ways. And in time, even they softened, learning from her kindness. At night, when the stars shone over the palace towers, Cinderella would stand at her balcony, remembering the days she sat alone by the hearth. She knew now that patience, courage, and kindness had guided her to her destiny. And so, with a heart full of love and a kingdom that cherished her, Cinderella lived happily ever after.